There's a common misconception about inheriting a house. People think you're inheriting an asset, a collection of wood and nails, plaster and pipes, all held together by a deed and a property tax bill. They're wrong. What you truly inherit is the silence between the floorboards. You inherit the memories stained into the wallpaper like tea. You inherit the weight, the sheer psychic pressure of every life that was lived and lost within its walls. I know this because last October I inherited the Blackwood house, and in doing so, I inherited a future that was never meant to be mine. My name is Alex Sterling. I'm an architect, or at least I was. My world was one of blueprints and load-bearing walls, of logic and straight lines. I believed, with an almost religious conviction, that every problem had a rational, measurable solution, that the universe, at its core, adhered to a set of unbreakable rules. That belief is now a ruin. The call came from a lawyer on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. My great-aunt, Ilara Sterling, had passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 94. I was her sole surviving relative, and she had left me everything. I'd only met her once, a brief, unsettling visit when I was 8 years old. My parents had driven us out to the town of Havenwood, Massachusetts, for a tense family obligation. My only memory was of a tall, unnervingly silent woman who seemed to listen to things that weren't there, and of a house that felt watchful. My parents never spoke of her again, and we never went back. My wife, Jenna, an artist whose soul is attuned to feelings and atmosphere in a way mine never was, saw it as a grand adventure. We were suffocating in our city apartment, and the idea of a sprawling Victorian home we could restore was an irresistible siren song. "Think of it, Alex," she had said, her eyes alight with a creative fire I hadn't seen in years. "A forever home. Something we can pour ourselves into. It's a dream." And when we first drove up the long, winding road flanked by ancient maples ablaze in their autumn glory, it did look like one. The Blackwood house sat on a hill overlooking the quiet town, a grand, slightly dilapidated queen from another century, its sharp gables and ornate trims silhouetted against the sky. It was beautiful, a masterpiece of forgotten craftsmanship. But as we stepped out of the car, a profound quiet settled over us, so thick it felt like a physical presence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, waiting silence. The house itself was a project. Dust motes danced like fairies in the slanted afternoon light. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, decaying paper, and something else, something metallic and cold. But the bones were good. As an architect, I could see it. The structure was sound, except for the basement. The basement was a disaster. It was a place where dampness had become a permanent resident, a cold that seeped up through the floorboards and into the very soul of the house. The old concrete floor was a fractured, uneven mess. "Well," I announced, my voice echoing in the cavernous space, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel, "I know where we start. We'll break all this up, dig a new foundation, put in a proper vapor barrier and drainage. We'll make it right." Jenna squeezed my hand, her faith in me a warm counterpoint to the basement's chill. I know you will." That was our first mistake, our first grand, catastrophic error. Believing we could make it right. Believing we had any control at all. The demolition was brutal, punishing work. For a week, the house shuddered with the roar of rented jackhammers. We hauled out the shattered concrete bucket by painstaking bucket, our muscles aching, our faces caked in gray dust. When it was done, we stood in the center of the cleared space, left with the dark, packed earth of the foundation. That's when the world, my neat, orderly world of blueprints and physics, began to tilt on its axis. I pulled out my laser measure to get the final dimensions for the new slab. The first reading was wrong. I recalibrated the device and measured again, still wrong. Frustrated, I went outside, my boots crunching on the fallen leaves, and measured the house's exterior foundation. A solid, verifiable number. I went back down into the cold, subterranean space. The numbers didn't lie, but they made no sense. The basement's interior dimensions were nearly 3 feet wider and 5 feet longer than the house's physical footprint allowed. That's not possible, I muttered, showing the readings to Jenna. She didn't look at the device. Her gaze was lost in the deep, oppressive shadows of the far corners. "This place feels wrong, Alex," she whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "It feels like it's breathing when we're not looking." I spent the next hour trying to debunk my own findings, my rational mind rebelling against the impossible data. I blamed the uneven ground, the angle of the laser, my own exhaustion. I made excuses because the alternative, that the space itself was breaking the fundamental laws of physics, was a thought my mind was simply not equipped to handle. We started digging. We broke the seal of the earth. And that's when the house started talking. It began with whispers of the future, echoes of moments yet to come. I was in the basement, my shovel scraping against a stubborn rock, when I heard a faint footstep on the wooden floor directly above me. I paused, listening. Silence. A moment later, I heard Jenna's footsteps as she walked into the kitchen overhead, matching the phantom sound exactly. A few days later, the whispers grew louder. Jenna was in the kitchen, washing vegetables. I was down below, mapping out the drainage plan. I heard it with startling clarity, the sharp, crystalline sound of a glass shattering on the tile floor upstairs. A split second later, a gasp, and then the real sound of the glass breaking. I bolted up the stairs. She was standing over a glittering puddle of water and shards of glass, her face as white as a sheet. "I heard it," she said, her voice a thin, reedy thing. Right before it happened, I heard it break, like a warning. "An echo," I said, the word tasting strange in my mouth. I tried to explain it away, acoustics, the way sound travels through old houses. Another excuse, another lie to patch the growing cracks in my reality. The house didn't care about my excuses. It had a story to tell, and it was going to tell it in chronological order. Our chronological order. The argument happened a week later. We were both tired, stressed, covered in dirt. A bill from a contractor was higher than we expected, and the fight began. As the words left our mouths, a horrifying sense of déjà vu washed over me. We were speaking the exact lines we had overheard from the basement a week prior. I saw the same realization dawn in Jenna's eyes. We weren't just arguing. We were reciting a script. We were puppets, our free will a complete and utter illusion. We finished the fight in a stunned, horrified silence. The echoes grew more frequent, more emotionally charged. They were always strongest near the basement, as if rising from the exposed earth like a heat haze. The house wasn't just showing us snippets of our future, it was showing us the cornerstones of a life we hadn't even begun to build. One night, we were woken from a dead sleep by a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was the soft, unmistakable sound of a baby crying. It was coming from the empty room down the hall, the one we'd idly planned to turn into a nursery someday. We don't have a child. We weren't even trying. The sound was so intimate, so heartbreakingly real. It felt like the deepest violation. We lay there in the dark, clutching each other, listening to the ghost of our unborn child weep until the sound faded away into the oppressive silence. Then, the haunting became visual. Jenna was in the sunlit parlor, her easel set up, trying to lose herself in her art. She saw a figure walk past the doorway in the hall. It was a woman with kind, tired eyes and graceful streaks of gray in her dark hair. It was wearing Jenna's favorite cardigan. It was her, 20 years from now. She said the apparition didn't look at her, just walked, with a quiet sense of purpose, as if on her way to water the plants. My turn came a few days later. I was in my office staring at a set of blueprints, trying to force the world to make sense again. I glanced up and saw a hand resting on the brass doorknob. A man's hand, my hand, but the skin was thinner, wrinkled and spotted with age. The gold wedding band I wore was the same, but it had grown tight on the knuckle. It rested there for a single, solid, undeniable second, and then vanished. We were no longer alone in the house. We were living with the ghosts of who we were going to become. My logical mind went into overdrive. I became a man possessed by rational explanations. I bought a carbon monoxide detector. I researched the effects of infrasound on the human brain. I took samples of the basement walls to test for fungal psychotropes. The results were all negative. The house was clean. The problem wasn't in the air or the walls. It was in the ground. It was in time itself. Desperate, I began a systematic search of the house, looking for anything left by Alara. A letter, a note, a clue that she had experienced this too. In her old mahogany writing desk, my fingers brushed against a loose piece of wood at the back of a drawer. It was a hidden compartment. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, secured with a tarnished brass lock. I didn't hesitate. I broke it open. The handwriting was Alara's, elegant and spidery, the ink faded but clear. The first entry was dated October 12th, 1948. The last was from just 3 months before she died. She had spent over 70 years documenting, analyzing, and surviving the same phenomenon. She never understood the science of it, but her intuition was terrifyingly accurate. She called it the Echo Well. This house does not sit on land. It sits on a deep place where time is not a river that flows, but a well that collects. The future does not flow away. It settles at the bottom, and its echoes rise to the surface like bubbles in still water. This house is not haunted by its past. It is pressured by its future. My heart pounded as I read on, my hands shaking. She had learned to live with it. She had developed rules. A grim, terrible set of rules for survival. Rule number 1, the journal read, never acknowledge the echo. When you hear a sound from a time not your own, you must not react. When you see a shade of yourself, you must not speak to it. To acknowledge an echo is to give it your attention, your energy. It solidifies that path. It makes the future concrete. Rule number 2, never follow the echo. If you see your future self walk into a room, you must not enter that room until the sun has set. To follow is to accept their path, to step onto the track they have laid. Rule number 3, never alter your path to avoid an echo. This is the cruelest rule and the most important. If you hear an argument, you must have it. If you see a moment of joy, you must live it. To deliberately fight the current of a prophecy is to guarantee it. The well despises a paradox. It will pull you under to correct it. We tried to live by her rules. It was a form of psychological torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. We became actors in our own lives, our every move and word governed by a terrible, prescient script. We were constantly on guard, not against a monster, but against ourselves. One afternoon, I was in my office, struggling with the design, when I heard it, an echo of myself from the living room shouting, "Eureka!" followed by the sound of triumphant, rapid typing. A breakthrough on the novel I'd been trying to write. According to rule number 3, I had to make it happen. I walked into the living room, sat down with my laptop, and forced myself to write. The breakthrough came, but the joy was gone. It was a hollow, mechanical victory, a task completed on a checklist written by a ghost. It was worse with the bad echoes. We heard the sound of Jenna weeping, a deep, heartbroken sob. For 2 days, we lived in a state of quiet dread until she received a call that her beloved grandmother had passed away. She went through the motions of her grief, her real sorrow tainted by the horrifying knowledge that it had been preordained. We were living in a prison of our own destiny, and the walls were closing in. The end began on a cold, still night in December. The wind had died down, and the world outside was silent, blanketed in a fresh layer of snow. We were lying awake in bed, the silence between us as heavy as a tombstone. And then a new echo rose from the basement. It was different. It was loud. It was clear and sharp and full of violence. It began with the high-pitched, frantic, ear-splitting shriek of a smoke alarm. Then came the hungry, violent crackle of a house fire, the sound of old, dry wood surrendering to the flames with a roar. And then, our own voices. My voice, screaming Jenna's name in a raw, desperate agony that tore through my own throat. Her voice, screaming mine, a sound of pure terror and loss. And then, an abrupt, final silence. We lay there, paralyzed in the dark, the echo still ringing in our ears. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. We had just heard our own deaths. We were going to die in this house, in a fire, together. Alara's third rule slammed into my mind like a physical blow. Never alter your path. My logical brain, even then, tried to find a loophole. Was this it? Were we supposed to just wait? To buy new batteries for the smoke alarm? To check the wiring and simply accept our fate? It was Jenna who broke the spell. She sat up, her breath misting in the cold air, her eyes wild in the moonlight. Her rules were for living here, Alex, for surviving day to day, not for dying here. She turned to me, grabbing my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. This isn't a future we can live through. She said the well despises a paradox. What's the biggest paradox we can possibly create? I stared at her, and in her terrified, defiant eyes, I saw the only path left, the only way out. We leave, I whispered, the words feeling like a sacrilege. We break the rule, she said, her voice gaining strength. We break the whole damn cycle, now! We didn't pack. We didn't grab the photo albums or the expensive art supplies or Alara's journal. We didn't even put on proper shoes. I grabbed my coat and my car keys from the hook by the door. Jenna grabbed hers. We ran down the stairs and out the front door, not looking back. We fled into the freezing night, leaving the lights on, leaving our entire lives, past and future, behind in that house. We weren't running from a ghost or a monster. We were running from destiny itself. The final scene of my old life is this. Me and Jenna, shivering in our car, parked at a scenic overlook hundreds of miles away from Havenwood. The sun is just beginning to rise, painting the dark sky in soft, tentative shades of pink and gold. We are exhausted, disheveled, and we have lost everything. Our home, our inheritance, our sense of a predictable, stable future. But we are together, and we are alive. Jenna looks at me, her eyes reflecting the new dawn. Her face is stained with tears, but her expression is clear. "What now?" she asks softly. I look out at the open road ahead, a road with no map, no blueprint, no pre-written destination. For the first time in my life, the uncertainty, the complete and total lack of a plan, doesn't scare me. It feels like breathing. It feels like freedom. I take her hand. It's warm. It's real. It's in the now. "I have no idea," I say, and for the first time in months, a genuine, unscripted smile touches my lips. Isn't it wonderful?